Thank you. Good morning. You did say one wife, right? I wasn't sure there. Well, my name is Edward. Are these both on or just this one? All right. My name is Edward, and as you've heard, I work for Samaritan's Purse. I've been with Samaritan's Purse since 1999. Just to stop the confusion right at the very start, yes, I do have a funny accent. It does depend who I'm talking with. I'm actually from Britain, from the United Kingdom, but I actually grew up in Kenya. My parents were missionaries in Kenya, so I spent the first 18 of my years of my life in Kenya. I am now the international director. That's not how I started off, and I tell you that just to encourage any of you, whatever made you started off. I was a PE teacher for the first 6 years of my working career. I enjoyed that. I had a lot of fun. Many days I wish I still was a PE teacher, playing games all day. It was kind of fun, but for better or for worse, that's not what God has called me to, and that's what I want to talk to you a little bit about today. Equipped for a great adventure. I was a little worried when I saw the word adventure that you guys were talking about, because to me, adventure has this glamorous, around the world in 80 days, romantic, getting on a big boat and traveling to some jungle and climbing some great big grand thing. And I want to say today that an adventure is not necessarily a glamorous thing. But I do believe that all of us have been called to a great adventure, and I want to talk to you today about what that means. I want to talk to you about some specific examples. We're going to go to 3 different countries that are very current and relevant today, and we're going to talk about them. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the Bible and what the Bible says about you. You know, equipped means 2 things for the sake of today. It means being ready and being willing. Being ready and being willing. I work for Samaritan's Purse, and Samaritan's Purse is we're non-denominational, we're a relief agency, we're very strongly about evangelism and discipleship. Our CEO and president is Franklin Graham, who's the son of Billy Graham. So evangelism, sharing the name of Jesus Christ, sharing the love of Jesus Christ is a part of everything we do. There's not a single project or activity we do that if the person requesting it or wanting to do it puts forward and there's not something very clear in it how this is going to have an impact for the kingdom of Christ on someone or somewhere or some group of people, then we don't do it. We don't do it. Everything has to have an impact for Christ. It's very, very important to us. We work with victims of war, famine, poverty, disease, natural disaster. We were in the tsunami, if you remember the tsunami, 2004 in December. We were in Haiti. We were in Haiti the day after the earthquake hit. We were in Japan. Actually, a story for another day. We weren't going to go to Japan because Japan is a very modern country, and God did 2 things. He made the churches call and ask for help, and He made our donors give us $25 million. So that week, we're like, okay, it looks like we made a bad decision. If God's given us $25 million, He obviously has something He wants us to do, so we need to get our act together and get over there. And I won't go into that story today, but it really was amazing what God had that He wanted to happen there, not because of Samaritan's Purse, but what He wanted to do through His people and His church there. We also work a whole lot in U.S. disasters, Katrina, some of the big tornadoes that happened last year, Hurricane Sandy, we were very involved in those. Philippines, a year and a half ago, was a big deal. We went there to help in Tacloban, respond to the storm and the devastation there. And then just this last year, the one that was in the news so much, we were very involved in Ebola. We didn't plan to be, but as you're going to find out today, God sometimes has different plans than what you think and what you hope to do. I'm going to talk about a lot of different things. If you think of questions, please write them down, because I'm going to try and save 20 minutes at the end that you can ask questions about more specific things or things that you want a little bit more explanation about. So please be ready for that. Samaritan's Purse. The name Samaritan's Purse comes obviously from the story of the Good Samaritan in the Bible. Thank you. And we believe very much in this command, and I'm going to talk about this a lot today. Go and do likewise. I think you all know the story of the Good Samaritan. It has 4 main characters in the story. A man is beat up by some robbers. He's left for dead. He's left to the side of the road in a ditch. There's 3 people that come to that man. Funny of them, interestingly enough, well, I think God does this intentionally, 2 of the people in the story Jesus tells about are religious people. Now, religious people doesn't necessarily mean godly people. We all know that. We all know that just because you're religious doesn't mean that you're a Christian. But I sometimes wonder if Jesus used two religious people instead of, really for the sake of this story, he could have used a banker and a tax collector or a farmer. He really could have used anything for the point of the story, but he said two religious people. And I think that's something that we, as Americans, need to think about in terms of our Christianity and what God calls us to do. But anyway, it tells us that two religious people came by. It actually says that one of them actually crossed to the far side of the road to get by him. It tells us that a Samaritan man came along, came around the corner. He saw the man in the ditch. He helped the man. He bound his wounds. He put him on his donkey, and he took him to an inn. And then at the inn, he paid for some help, and he said, I'll be back to settle the bill later. So that's what the Samaritan man did. And at the very end of that story, Jesus says, now go and do likewise. Now go and do likewise. And we at Samaritan's Purse feel very strongly that not only we are named after the Good Samaritan, because that's what we do, we go through life, and when there's a disaster or something happens, we go around the corner and something's happening on the side of the road, we believe we're called to go there. We're called to go and do likewise, to do what this man did. So what did he do? He did three things as a Good Samaritan. First of all, he was willing to cross the road. He didn't stay on the far side of the road. He didn't walk by. He was willing to cross the road and go meet that man in the ditch where he was. He was willing to go to where the man was. He gave up his plans for that day. I'm sure he wasn't just walking because he was strolling. He was on a plan. He had something he was doing. He was willing to give up his plans that day to go and do something else, to bind up a man's wounds, put him on a donkey, take him to somewhere he wasn't planning to go. And the third thing he did is he provided meaningful help. He provided help that mattered. He didn't walk by and just throw a couple coins. He actually helped the man and did what he could to help the man. And that's what we at Samaritan's Purse, that's what we try and do, those three things. We try and do it so that we can say, we're going to go and do likewise, just like Jesus commanded his believers, his disciples to do. And actually, just like Jesus is commanding all of us to do, to go and do likewise. So at Samaritan's Purse, we meet people's physical needs and we meet their spiritual needs. We work closely with the church. We work closely to bring the church into everything we do. We bring Christ into everything we do. Everything from a water presentation that we do, we find a way to link it back to Jesus being the water of life, or a food presentation, link it back to Jesus being the bread of life. Whatever it is, we're trying to provide the help. We're also trying to make sure that Jesus Christ not only gets glory in what happens, but his name is promoted and his kingdom is built through all the opportunities God brings our way. And opportunity is an interesting word because just like in the Good Samaritan, you don't know many of the opportunities you're going to be given. And you're going to see in some of the stories we're going to look at, people didn't go expecting that opportunity, but when they walked around the corner and there was the man lying in the ditch, they were willing to go and do likewise. So what does that mean to you? What does it mean to you to go and do likewise? We're going to look at three different situations. They're all current situations. You've all probably heard of them. I'm not going to talk comprehensively about what we did or what happened or a lot of the details. Please feel free to ask me questions if you have them. But I want to talk more specifically about some of the people in these situations who were willing to cross the road. They were willing to go and do likewise in the situation that they found. Many of these people did not go for this calling. They couldn't say, I was called to go and do this. But they can say, I was called to serve, and when I went around that corner and I found the man in the ditch, I knew Christ had said, go and do likewise. So they weren't necessarily prepared for this, but they were ready and they were willing for when that happened. Okay. Northern Iraq. I know everyone's heard a lot about Iraq in the last 10, 15 years, whether it was the two wars that have been there, the devastation under Saddam Hussein, the crisis in Syria that started to happen, and then more recently this summer, the whole issue with ISIS, the terrible situations that we've seen with ISIS, the terrible things that are going on. We work mainly up in the blue area, and just a tiny bit of political history, geography. The blue area is a group of people called the Kurds, and the Kurds are in Iran, they're in northern Iraq. They caused some problems known as the PPK in Turkey. So there's a whole area that's kind of called Kurdistan, which is what the Kurds would claim is all their country. Obviously, they don't have a country. They have some separate places. But up in northern Iraq, the Kurdish people are governed by what's called the Kurdish Regional Authority, and they have a relationship with the government of Iraq where it's mutual and it's okay, and the government of Iraq lets them look after themselves and govern themselves as part of Iraq. So we work up in northern Iraq, and we've been there for probably 7 or 8 years now, up in a place called Erbil. Just recently, with all the fleeing that's happened, a lot of people have fled into that area. You see the blue area on the map, and the reason they're fleeing into that area is because it's governed by the Kurdish Regional Authority. They have some protection. They have their own army. If you've seen, the PPK is at war with the government of Turkey, but the government of Turkey let the PPK travel freely through to go to the city of Kobani when it was under attack to help defend them. So the Kurdish have their own army, and their own army is protecting them. So people are fleeing to Kurdistan. They're fleeing out of Syria. They're fleeing out of Iraq itself to get away from ISIS, to get away from the terrible scenes of devastation that you see. I know we're all very aware of what ISIS has done to some expatriates. I think you know this, but let me just tell you what ISIS is doing to just the normal people, the everyday people, the people that live in Syria and Iraq is devastating. It's happening. We see it in a few Westerners that things happen to. It's happening to them in the hundreds, maybe even the thousands. Just terrible things happening to these people. So these are middle-class people. These are people like you. These are people who had a car, lived in an apartment, probably had electricity, probably had a refrigerator and a stove. Their kids probably went to school. They had a normal, I guess what we would call a middle-class life, which is unusual for us. Usually the refugees that we work from are in very poor places, fleeing with nothing. So these people had to leave all that behind. They had to run for their very lives. They lost people to ISIS along the way. And now they've turned up in what's a very strongly Muslim country, a very, very strongly controlled by Muslims, and they've turned up there looking for help, not sure where to turn to. But the really cool thing is that this whole situation didn't surprise God. As they fled in there, God had people there. Even though it was a very strongly Muslim culture, God had people there. He had Christians. He had a church who were ready and who were willing to help these people as they come. I have a brief video that I want to show you. It's called Forgiving ISIS. And it just tells you the story of some of these Christians who are reaching out and doing what they can do to help.
It is not just the time for forgiveness. It is not the time for words. It is the time for work. I ask my Lord to not lose this opportunity. One time they blew up my church. One time they attacked me and was during the mass by 5 missiles. One time I got shot in my leg, still the bullets in my leg, the left. And I've been kidnapped for 9 days, and almost they broke my teeth, my nose. And they use all that by Allah's name. I have to forgive them. Not because I have, because it's order. But we have to forgive, because to let the grace transfer from generation to generation. If not, that means the pain and the hate will close the way to the grace of God. So still in this country, as a Christian, we're still like salt and light. Doesn't matter what happened to me or to my people in my generation. But we have to take care about kids. They are the future. If we will not take care about kids, our kids now, the next generation of ISIS, they will be from our side.
مگو کیل مالا کشوا فلک یا گو یک دیا کتن نکر. ما دیتن بلوریان بار کر.
We've heard stories here of just horrific stories of one little boy that, his whole family was shot, except him. And kids showing up in bare feet. And just one young girl here today that lost her whole family. So at this time, we really need to absolutely show that God is a God of love.
We're living a difficult time, you know, and now we are in winter with running and cold. Many people still now is in the tents. But we thank God for many Christians to coming and help us, like you, Samaritan groups, with blankets and heaters and jacket. With your support, we can going on.
So each jacket we're fitting to these children to be as snug and warm as possible. Hundreds of these children have the clothes on their back and they're not ready for this harsh winter. So like this little man right now, be able to get his own jacket. One that'll fit him. One that'll fit him perfectly. You like a jacket? Yeah. Yeah, put your... And the children that are big, we're making them big so they can wear coats underneath it as the only clothes they have. Can you get back there?
You know, everyone we come across has a story. Their homes are gone. Their history, their lives, their tradition are gone. And so we don't run away from this trouble. We go to it and we bring the love of Christ to people, meeting their physical needs, meeting their spiritual needs, and say like, you know, here, we as the church are standing with you and we're able to help your people.
I believe that one day, the next generation, they will forget who persecute us, but we never forget the people who stand and help us. They say, Father, what do you need? I say, generator. And just like this, generator was here. I said, okay, why I didn't ask another thing? Let's see just behind me, the new tents there. That one is held for 4 years. It's very strong, it's very expensive. That's by Samaritan Pairs, and each one there is 2 families. You know, the minimum of what we are doing here is the minimum of our duty. We are not doing that as a favor to the people, because as a Christian, this is our job. We are proud because we are Iraqi people, but Iraq is not proud because we are part of it. We are dying here. Save my people. That's all.
So does that look like someone who's ready and willing for what God's asked them to do? It was amazing how the government in Northern Iraq, we've been there for a number of years, and the government sort of tolerated us as Christians. We were in a place called the Fountain of Love in Sulaymaniyah. We never hide the fact that we're Christian. We never hide the fact that we're about the name of Jesus. But they were very cautious and not very tolerant of it at all. What's been really amazing to see is to see God use this crisis to open doors. God getting the government to the place where the government is asking Samaritan's Purse, run by Franklin Graham, who's said plenty of things about Islam, and yet the Islam government's asking Samaritan's Purse, asking the Christians to come and to help. We had the churches opened up their buildings and their houses to all these people fleeing, and we're looking after them. But obviously when you flee with nothing and it's wintertime, you don't have simple things. You don't have pots and pans to cook on. You don't have blankets. You don't have jackets to keep warm. So we tried to get as much in as possible quickly. We actually had a hard time because of just getting everything in with all the conflicts. So we had to charter a 747 to fly in supplies so that we could hand out supplies to people. And actually not us handing out, the church handed it out to people, and the church was the face telling people about Jesus and sharing the hope as they gave items that people needed so badly. And to have the government start to soften to us and start to realize, okay, the Christians, we don't believe in Jesus. We've been taught that these are our enemies, but they're the ones that are actually coming. They're the ones that are turning up. They're the ones that are willing to help. And this all sort of culminated in a story that you might have read about. There was a plateau the Sinjar Plateau, where there was a group of people. They called them the Yazidi Christians, but they aren't really Christians. They really are of Jewish descent. So to a Muslim, to an Arab, they will call those Christians because they're not Muslims. But don't be confused. The Yazidi religion has nothing to do with Jesus Christ or Christianity. But anyway, these Yazidi Christians were caught on top of the plateau, surrounded by ISIS. And the government of northern Iraq, the Kurdish Regional Authority, came to us and said, please, Samaritan Spurs, we have the helicopters. Will you get some supplies and will you take them into these people? They're surrounded. They have nothing. We want to be able to help them. So to us, that was almost a milestone that the Islamic government is coming to Samaritan Spurs, a Christian organization, and asking us to help. So we did. We were able to use their military helicopters. They provided escort. We were able to fly in some stuff to help the people. And thankfully, praise the Lord, pretty soon after that, there was a pathway opened and the people could get off the plateau and get to safety before they were overrun by ISIS. And we thought that was the end of the story. But then about 2 weeks ago, we had some visitors, our vice president and a couple board members, some other people that were visiting, and the Yazidi prince, the prince of the Yazidi people, had asked, could Samaritan Spurs, could we meet these people? Could they come and speak with us? So of course they're like, well, of course we can. He said, you were the ones that came and helped us. In fact, the Yazidi prince had this comment. He said, why are the Christians the only ones helping us? Why is it only the Christians who are coming to help us? If you've ever worked in a Muslim country or a closed country, you know that question in itself is the key that you've been waiting for. We had this in Darfur. Darfur in Sudan is a very, very closed country. You cannot share the gospel. You can't proselytize. You can't preach. You can't do any of those things. You can probably do them one time, but that would be the only time that you would do it. But then when someone stops and asks you, why are the Christians here helping us? Why are you here? Where's the Muslims? We've been taught you are the enemy. Why are the Christians here? Straight away, you have the opening you've been waiting for. Well, I'll tell you why we're here. I'll tell you why we're here. Jesus told us to go and do likewise, and Jesus wants you to know that he loves you, and he wants you to know that he sent his son to die on the cross, and we can tell them why they're there. So we got an opportunity to tell this very dark cultic group called the Yazidis. They have a pope, they have a temple. Some people think it comes out of the book of Ezekiel, where there were a group of people who started worshiping the sun, and God turned his back on them. Just a very dark place, and yet we were able to present the gospel to them. We were able to share the good news of Jesus Christ. We were able to give a Bible. They don't have the scriptures written in their language. They don't have a biblical book. They don't have a religious book. So we were able to say to them, well, here, this is the book you've been missing. This is what your religion's missing. Here, we have it. We can give it to you. You can start learning about it. So it was just an amazing opportunity. You know, in northern Iraq, a very closed country, God has been able to use this crisis to provide unprecedented, open, free access for the Christians to share the love of Christ, for the Christians to show what it means to go and do likewise. They were ready and they were willing, and then they've been able to go and do that, and Christ is getting glory. So this is one group of people that's equipped and going through the adventure that God's put before them, that God set before them. They're ready and willing to do it, and they're doing what Jesus said. They're crossing the road, they're opening up their houses, they're giving up their plans, and they're doing all they can to help. The second place is Liberia. I'm not sure what the word Liberia means to you. To us, in the last year, it means one thing. It means Ebola. The crisis of Ebola, the sickness, the devastation, all that happened there. For those of you that don't know, Liberia is a country on the west coast of Africa. It's actually famously where many years ago, when the slaves, when the U.S. wanted to go back to Africa, it's the country that was given to them. So it's a very unique country. Their flag is almost like the U.S. flag. They speak a very rough form of English that has a lot of Americanisms in it. If you've been to Africa a lot, it's really strange to go to Liberia because you're almost like not sure where they're coming from. The accents are so different. We went to Liberia right after the Civil War. They had a terrible civil war. Charles Taylor was overthrown. He was put in prison in The Hague. So we went to Liberia and started working, and we had no idea that round the corner in the ditch was going to be Ebola in this crisis. But we went to where God wanted us to go. God knew exactly what he was doing. God was preparing 10 years ago for such a time as this, for what he was going to ask us to do. So we happened to choose 3 main places that we worked with. We worked up in Foya, we worked in Bopolu, and we worked in Monrovia. That's the 3 places we set up bases. We also did some stuff at the very end in River G, but really the 3 places we've been at for 10 years were Foya, Bopolu, and then in Monrovia. And in Monrovia, of all places, we settled at the SIM compound called Elwa, which is where there's a hospital, a big medical facility. Again, having no idea, but knowing that it's Samaritan's Purse, we helped with World Medical Mission. We did medical stuff so we could help them. We were in Foya. The reason we chose Foya, it was a long way from Monrovia, and nobody wanted to go to Foya to work. So we're like, okay, we'll go up to Foya to work. We'll go up there and work. When Ebola hit, Ebola started just north of Foya across the border in Guinea, and it spread from there. And that area, I know you can see yellow lines on the map. It looks like a border, but when you go to Foya, you can go from one village to the next and like, oh, you just came into Guinea. And you're like, really? Where? There's nothing. You would never know. So people cross and walk very freely. Families are separated by the border because really the border has no meaning up there. It's just all jungle. But Ebola came across the border into Foya, and it hit Foya, and then it traveled down the road to Bopolu, and then traveled down the road to Monrovia, and ended up right in the hospital where we were working, right in the SIM compound where the hospital was. There was another hospital up the road that was a government-run hospital. People didn't want to go there. They wanted to come to our hospital. We had set up a facility and we're working there. And the reason I tell you all that history is that 10 years ago, God started to get us ready for what he was going to ask us to do last year. I think if he told us 10 years ago, this is what I'm going to ask you to do, I think we would have run. We would have, Ebola, when you see it, and you're going to see it in a minute on a video, very terrifying, very scary, impacts huge people, fearful because it's very hard to tell how it spread. It's so infectious that although it's very easy to stop it spreading, there's a lot of unknown and a lot of fear. So we ended up around the corner in the ditch with Ebola and being asked by God, are you ready and willing? I want you to watch this video, and then I'm going to tell you the story of some people who were ready and they were willing, and it cost them a big price.
The Ebola outbreak is still continuing.
This invisible disease is lurking all over.
Ebola is a deadly virus, and there's about a 70 to 90% case fatality rate.
1 drop of human body fluid contains between 500,000 and 1 million strings of the virus. It takes 10 strings of the virus to infect you.
We are up against a really, really big challenge.
There's a lot of fear, there's a lot of frustration.
In real life, it's very different than what you see on television. It's people, it's your neighbors.
The fight against infectious diseases has to occur. And if we just sit back and do nothing, then the fight will come to us.
We come back because we care, and we come back because we have a calling. This is who we are as Christians.
This is such a terrifying and traumatizing time for Liberian people, and we can't neglect to give them hope.
30, 20, 10.
We just received a full 747 plane load of equipment, supplies, and with that comes all the work that is involved in unloading. Although I'm a medical doctor, all hands have been on deck.
You can maybe see behind me, we're offloading onto trucks that have to be the higher trucks because they have to go through the mud, and the roads are almost impassable.
Where we have been this week has been in a very rural area. We had to go by helicopter, a few hours down there. The staff that we're asking to do this training will be taking motorbike or walking.
By staying in that room, they're doing everyone outside of that home a favor. They are practicing the highest
Samaritan's Purse has a history, and we have experience, we have knowledge about community training and community mobilization. In Liberia, we have networks in hundreds of villages. By using that same network, we can teach people the basics of how to create an isolated area. We can teach them how to put on their protective gear, and we will give them these materials to do that. And we will send supervisors or overseers back to visit at each home on a daily basis to advise the caregiver and to encourage them to pray with them. we're going to build 15 community care centers. We will train the staff that are in them, and we will manage those staff.
Our staff of Samaritan Press will go where nobody dared to go for the purpose of sharing the love of Christ.
Samaritan's Purse, in my opinion, cannot do this alone.
It is not enough just to provide money. It requires actual hands-on people to come on site, to provide care, to provide logistical support.
We need prayer. The people of Liberia need mercy. Pray for them.
Ebola is terrifying. Ebola really is a terrifying disease, whether you're a family and you're not sure who's going to get it next, where it's going to come from. This is in a part of Africa, where Liberia, where they're very strongly animist. They're very strongly, they have voodoo background. They're not very well educated. So for them, a disease like this, there are all sorts of misconceptions as to where it comes from, which makes training and helping them avoid it really, really difficult, because they don't believe that washing their hands is going to make a difference, because they believe they're dealing in a spirit world with things that happen, and they are dealing in a very demonic world, but very hard to help them and to train. And just think for one moment when you wake up one morning and you have a fever, or you start getting diarrhea, and your family, the government insists, and you know the right thing to do is to take them to what you heard them talk about, a CMC, a community care center, community medical center. You go to a community medical center and you're put on a plastic sheet on a wooden bed. You're not put there so that you can receive excellent medical care. For the numbers of people getting sick every week in Liberia, there's no way you could give them medical care. You're put there so that you're isolated from the rest of the country, from the rest of the community, next to other people who are dying of Ebola every day, and then you wait and see. Are you going to be one of the people that survives? Or are you going to be part of the 70% that's not going to make it through the next week? They can't go outside and see their family. They never see their family. They're outside the fence, they're kept separate. The family doesn't know what's going on. They have to wait and see. But you have to do everything you can to separate them, to isolate them, to keep them away from spreading the disease and spreading it through people. You heard what Ken Isaac said about the virility of the disease, how it takes very little to do it. And we know for a fact that it takes very little, because we see some people who were fully protected, who took every precaution, and they still got the disease, because in those last days of a patient's life, it's so rampant. There's so much of it. And unfortunately, that was a big cause in Liberia. Liberia is very, very strong on ancestors and ancestor worship, which means that when someone does die, there's very, very specific things you have to do with the body. So first of all, we had to make sure we could teach them, you can't do those things with the body, because the body is the most viral. The body is highly, highly infectious, and everything to do with it is, so you can't follow your normal practices. And secondly, the burial and where you put the person is very, very important in that society. Well, just because of logistics and scope, the government was driving around just collecting all the bodies and getting rid of them as quickly as possible in pits and covering them up to help get rid of that huge cause of infection. So just some really, really difficult things that the people of Liberia went through, that were impacted, were touched by this. If you watched it, you saw pictures of people trying to get into the care centers that were overflowing, and they couldn't take them, and they don't know what to do. They're just sitting outside, and they don't know what to do and what's happening next. So I want to tell you about three people up on the slide who were in Liberia. They were in Liberia working. They were doing normal Samaritan's Purse walk. They were doing nutrition training. They were helping people learn how to plant better gardens, how to do livestock. They were helping provide water and sanitation for people. And then Ebola hit. And they had to decide if they were ready and willing for what it was God had put before them. The one on the left was a program designer. And she found herself having to design a training and use the church leaders and the churches to get this training out as quickly as possible to as many people as possible, so you could prevent them getting infected, prevent the infection from spreading. The one on the right was a water engineer. She has her PhD in water. She does wells and hand pumps and helps people get safe drinking water and doing all those different things. Well, because sanitation's in her title, she was put in charge of a sanitation team. A sanitation team at a CMC means you're the ones that put on the suit and you go and you clean out the bodies of the people that have died and you try and clean the room from the infection. And I'm sure you've read about what Ebola does when you die. It's not pretty, and it's very, very messy, and it's very scary. She was in charge of that sanitation team. She spent her days going into rooms, picking up dead bodies, disposing of them cleanly, cleaning all the blood and the feces and everything else that was all over that room, trying to get the room clean, because outside in the waiting area was the next patient waiting to come in and to climb on that bed and wait and see if they lived or died. She didn't ask for that, she didn't sign up for that, but that's what came around the corner. That's what she saw in the ditch and she had to deal with. The one in the middle was a nurse. So when she was there, she was up in FOIA. She was actually doing everything that she had been trained to do to try and help people survive. And to hear her stories is actually harrowing. You know, as a nurse, you're trained to try and help people to help them survive. And to have a mortality rate of 70% is just devastating to see the number of people that get sick. She told me a story of a little boy that she was caring for, and she thought he was doing well, and she was walking around with him holding his hand. Someone handed her a clipboard to look over to review, and she let go of the boy's hand. She looked at the clipboard. When she looked at the little boy, he had died. He had sat down and lay down and died. He was dead. That's the kind of thing she had to deal with. And then one morning she woke up and she had diarrhea. You have diarrhea or fever with Ebola, you immediately isolate yourself. You take a test and you wait and see if you have Ebola or if you just ate something bad the night before. But when you've been around in a CMC around people with Ebola all the time and the death and all that that's going on, that's a very scary time. That's a time when you sit back and you ask yourself, okay, I was ready and I was willing, but really? Like, what's this part of it? Where does this come from? How is this a part of it? She waited her 3 days. You have to wait 3 days. The first day when you do the Ebola test, it usually comes back clear because the virus hasn't taken hold of your body. She waited 3 days, and praise the Lord, she came back with negative. She did not have Ebola. That was a huge praise, a huge prayer relief. But if you know anything about Samaritan's Purse this summer, you know that wasn't always the case. We had a couple people who did have Ebola. When that third day test came back, somebody had to walk down to where they were isolated and tell them, you're a doctor, you've been working with these people, you've seen how they die, you've seen what happens, and I'm really sorry to tell you, you have Ebola. How do you answer that when you say to God, God, I was ready and I was willing, and I didn't plan for this, but I stayed. I didn't run, I didn't go hide, I stayed, and now I have Ebola. And it's going to be interesting, I'm going to talk to you about this at the very end, but for such a time as this is such an important phrase. And if you talk to Dr. Kent Brantley and ask him, Kent, why did you get Ebola? Why did God allow you to get Ebola after all you're doing and all the protection? He has a very, very clear answer for you. He'll tell you very clearly. He said, because I had Ebola, I had huge press, I had a huge platform to speak on, and I could tell a whole group of people who'd never heard about Jesus how Jesus healed me of Ebola and how he has salvation for them. So he knew that even though he had this, he can now look back, for such a time as this, God, you asked me to do something. You asked me to go through something. I was ready and willing. And look at what the plan and the purpose you had for it was. We're very pleased. There still is Ebola in Guinea and Sierra Leone, but last week, the last patient that had Ebola in Liberia actually left the care center. She was better and she left. So currently there are no cases. It doesn't mean they're safe. It doesn't mean they're out of the woods. The incubation period is 20 days. The UN makes you wait 42 days before you can declare your country Ebola-free. Ebola still exists in Sierra Leone and Guinea. In fact, just 2 days ago, there was a British medical person that came down with Ebola in Sierra Leone. So please do continue to pray for that country. The last place I want to talk about is South Sudan. South Sudan is the newest country in the world. Got its independence in 2011. Obviously, as you heard earlier, it's a little bit personal for me because that's where I started. Oh, she's texting. South Sudan used to be one big country of Sudan. Now it got split in two in 2011. We started working there in 1997. My wife and I went in 1998. And I want to just point out two places specifically to you. There's a place called Yida, and there's a place called Maban over to the right. When the whole country was one country under Sudan, there were two places where we worked. We went to a place called the Nuba Mountains in 2000. We went to Southern Blue Nile, which is over on the east side, in 2001. Again, God knew what he was doing, and he knew where he was positioning us, because we worked there for 10 years. And then the peace came, the country was divided, South Sudan became its own country, but the Nuba Mountains and Southern Blue Nile were left on the wrong side of the border. So the government started attacking them and drove them across the border, and they settled in two places, Maban and Yida. Very, very harsh places. There was nothing in Yida. In fact, Yida is like a little mud plateau that goes out into the swamp. The Sud in South Sudan is the largest swamp in the world, and they live on this little flat plateau with the government up above them on all sides. They've been bombed. They fled because while they were up in the Nuba Mountains, the government was destroying their food, and we went up and found them. They were eating grass and leaves and insects. They really didn't have a whole lot. They fled. They had to flee to safety. They came over the border. And praise the Lord, these are people we knew. These are people we'd worked with, so we were able to immediately help set up camps in Yida and Maban. In Maban, there's a doctor called Dr. Attar. Dr. Attar is a Sudanese doctor who was in Kermuk, which is across the border in what is now Sudan. He was running a hospital there with our support for many years. When the government came and overtook it and tried to destroy the hospital, he took the government ambulance, he put as many supplies in it as he could, and he drove through the night to get across the border to come. He found a school building, and he unloaded the ambulance, and he set up a hospital, and then he called us and said, okay, I'm ready, come and help me, bring some more supplies, I'm ready. So we have a hospital there that we run. There's a picture on there of a young lady from the Philippines who was ready and willing. I first went to Yida in 2011 in the summer, and I found her along with two other people working. They were working in a camp. They were surrounded by the refugees who it's not like they're living in tents, they're just living under whatever they can live, sleeping on the ground all around them. She's a midwife, and she was living in a tiny tent. Her tent had flooded the night before, her mattress was soaking wet. They hadn't had a hot meal in 4 days. All the supplies they had to come on the back of a four-wheeler, but when you're bringing supplies in, are you going to bring medicines for the kids, or are you going to bring a blanket for yourself? These are hard decisions they had to make. So they had very, very little there in the camp that they were looking at. But the reason I tell you about her is I want you to tell her she was ready and willing for what God had asked her to do. She was ready and willing to go and do likewise and to live in this horrendous situation to do what she was trained to do. I was only there 2 nights that first time, and both nights she was called in the middle of the night. They would come rattling at the gate and calling her, please come, someone's in labor, they need your help. And she would go down with her flashlight, and she would turn on the lanterns, and she would do all she could, what she was trained to do, to help those ladies have a self-delivery. You know, these people had fled, and just like the people in Iraq, when they fled, they had nothing with them that they took. They just ran. There's a really neat story of the people in the Nuba Mountains who sent out their school kids and their teacher and told them, you go down to Yida, to the camp down there, and just set up a school under the trees and keep on educating yourselves, because we know we need you to be educated if we have any sort of a future. And we had built a whole bunch of churches in the Nuba Mountains. We'd built about 150 churches. We had a lot of chance to work with the pastors. When we turned up at Yida, a lot of those pastors had come down with their churches, and we were able to give them supplies and things they needed as they continued to share the gospel and to preach, to bring the good news in that terrible situation. It's really interesting theology that in a disaster is when people lose hope and they've lost everything. That's when their hearts are soft and tender, and that's when they need the gospel. They need the hope. We saw that in Japan. We saw that in the Philippines. We saw that in Haiti. That's when people need the gospel. They need to know about Jesus. They need a hope beyond the hope that they've lost. So all this brings you back around to what we started with. The story of the Good Samaritan. Here's an ordinary man walking down the road. He goes around the corner, he sees someone in the ditch, and God does something extraordinary with him. And the reason I say extraordinary is not that he did a fantastic thing, but the reason I say extraordinary is because Jesus said, go and do likewise. Go and do what that man just did. That's a pretty strong statement to come from Jesus, for him to tell all of us, his disciples, to go and do likewise. We talked about being ready and willing. The two questions for you: are you ready and are you willing? You know, in the Bible, it talks about, there's a story in Luke chapter 6. There's a story about feeding of the 5,000. Jesus tells a story of this great miracle that he did. But there was a little person in that story who was ready and was willing. He didn't realize it, he didn't know, but he was. And that's the small boy. When the disciples go and find him, and he comes and he says, I have 5 loaves and I have 2 fishes. And Jesus does what? He blesses it and he does a great miracle. That little boy had no idea that he was ready to do what God had asked him to do. And I have a question for you today with that. What if that little boy had turned up and he had already eaten 1 fish and 2 of the loaves? He's like, wow, Jesus, I'm really sorry. I only have 3 loaves and 1 fish left. Like, Jesus like, oh man, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? I can't do this miracle. That I needed 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Was that true? Or if he turned up with a whole basket of food, it says there were 12 left over, would Jesus been like, oh, phew, this is going to be easy. I just have to do half a prayer for this one. This is going to be easy. It didn't make any difference, because that little boy, whether he knew it or not, was ready. Because it didn't matter to Jesus how much he bought. Jesus could do with whatever he bought him. He just needed the little boy to be ready, to be willing. You know, it says in Ephesians, for we are God's handiwork. God has created you. You are his handiwork. He's created you in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for you to do. So are you ready? Well, God tells you you're his handiwork. He made you. He created you to do good works. He created you to do the things you're going to find when you walk around the corner in the ditch. He made you and he created those for you. And not only that, he did it in advance. He knew beforehand what's going to surprise you in your future. As you go through your future and you're going to be asked, are you ready to go and do likewise? You're going to go around the corner and you're going to feel for yourself, okay, am I ready? Am I willing to do this? I want to argue today with you, that's not 2 questions, that's only 1 question. The real question is, are you willing? Because you are ready. You all know the verse in Philippians, for I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That's all things. That's not, well, all things, but Ebola, that's bigger than all. Like, I'm not ready to that. That's bigger. No, it says all things. So when you're sitting here listening, you know that you are ready because God created you. You are his handiwork. So the question is, are you willing? And I love the story of Moses in the Bible. Moses was asked, number 1, before we judge him, Moses was asked to do a very big task. He was asked to single-handedly go and take the people out of slavery from the biggest, strongest army ever known at that time and set them free. So of course he had some doubts. And Moses says some things to God. It's at the burning bush. And God's asking Moses, okay, Moses, I've prepared you for such a time as this. I'm ready, let's go. And Moses is like, whoa. And just 2 real quick things in that story. The first thing is, Moses has 5 questions that he asks God. The first one, God doesn't even answer. He asks God, but God, who am I? Who am I to do this? And God doesn't even answer the question. And that's part of you knowing that you're ready. God doesn't answer the question about Moses, but he says to Moses, Moses, it doesn't matter who you are. Who cares who you are? I will be with you. That's all you need. I will be with you. So although Moses wasn't willing, he was ready. And it's interesting because if you read through that little interaction between God and Moses, the very last one, God almost in exasperation says to Moses, Moses, what is that in your hand? And he looks and he has a staff in his hand. And if you follow through Moses and the miracles he did in freeing the people, that staff in his hand was all that he needed. He already had in his hand what God needed him to have to do what he was asking him to do. So I say all that to say you are ready. You have to decide if you're willing. I've said a number of times through this talk, for such a time as this, which comes from the story of Esther. Esther had ended up in the king's palace where people were being persecuted. Haman wanted to kill them. And Mordecai is telling Esther, Esther, you have to do something. You have to go and say something. You're the only one that can. And Esther says, I'm not sure. I'm not willing. I'm not sure I want to do that. And Mordecai says the words to Esther. He says, Esther, for such a time as this has God placed you where you are. For such a time as this. Those are questions you are going to have to answer. Are you ready and are you willing for when such a time as this. And that might be today. You might find that it's today for such a time as this. You might find that something happens. But I can tell you from my own experiences, my own life, there are going to be things that you go through, just like Joseph and his years in prison, that are all designed by God to prepare you and to get you ready for sometime in your future when God will ask you for such a time of this. I've put you here for such a time of this. Maybe it'll be in Liberia with Ebola. Maybe it'll be in Sudan. Maybe it'll just be with your neighbor next door, which is where the original story was asking, who is my neighbor? And go and do likewise. But God is going to have a time where he's going to put you in a position, and he's going to tell you, or maybe someone beside you is going to tell you, for such a time as this, God has prepared you, and you are ready. There's no question you're ready or not, because if God is with you and you believe his promises, you are ready. The only question is, are you willing? So the last thing I want to leave you think about, will you be ready and willing to go and do likewise when God calls you for such a time as this? Will you be ready and willing? That's the question that you need to think on and answer. I know I've given you a whole bunch of information and talked about a lot of different things. Anybody write down some questions that they wanted to ask more specifically about perhaps one of the situations or one of the circumstances? Somewhere you have any interest in? Any questions, or is it lunchtime? Okay, well, if there's no questions, please do feel free to come up and talk to me afterwards. Charity and Lucy are here. I think they're here all week, and they can also go if you have any interest in Samaritan's Purse and some of the things we do. Or you can talk to Ritz here. Ritz knows a lot of it as well. Please do come and ask questions. But thank you very much for listening. And my prayer for you this week is that as God is speaking to you through different people talking, that you'll hear what he has to say to you. And when the day comes, you'll find yourself knowing that you're ready, and you'll be willing to do what God has called you to do. Because it's great things, and he's already planned them, and he's ready for you. So thank you so much for listening, and have a good day.
We hope you enjoyed this message. Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Learn more at biola.edu.